be very nice and say, oh, well, we'll work to it. Look, it's not going to happen.
It gives us the opportunity to recoup some of our money, but also it means for Ukraine that the United States is going to invest in their country and have a presence there.
I will have to find a new job. I'll have to find a new career. This is all I have wanted to do since I was 20 years old.
Hello, everyone. I'm Major Garrett in Washington. Tonight on America Decides, special relationship stress test. President Trump meets with British Prime Minister Keir Starmer in talks that could have a lot of influence over how strong the transatlantic cooperation between the two countries remains. Topics discussed: security guarantees, yes or no, for Ukraine, and a plea from the UK to be spared from potential trade tariffs.
Prime Minister Starmer, you've been terrific in our discussions. You're a very tough negotiator, however. I'm not sure I like that, but that's okay.
Drug deterrent. President Trump's tariffs on Mexico and Canada, he says, will go into effect Tuesday unless more is done in each of those countries to stop the flow of fentanyl into the United States. Meanwhile, the current 10% trade tariff on China, the president said, will be doubled on Tuesday to 20%. The president posting on social media that illicit drugs such as fentanyl are being smuggled into the United States at, quote, unacceptable levels, and that import taxes, which is what tariffs are, would force countries, he believes, to do more to crack down on that trafficking. And foreign aid freeze. The last day on the job has arrived for hundreds of employees at the nation's largest foreign aid agency, known as USAID. Employees today given 15 minutes, just 15 minutes, to retrieve their personal belongings as the State Department slashes $60 billion in grants and funding for the agency. Caitlin Huey-Burns is on Capitol Hill. Alexander Tin is here with me at the table. But we start tonight with this repertorial show of force with Nancy Cordes at the White House. And Nancy, with your permission, I'm just going to let you have open field running. Summarize today with the British Prime Minister and then the question and answer interaction you had with President Trump.
Sure. So you could tell that Prime Minister Starmer was doing his very best here at the White House today, Major, to downplay any disagreements that he or other European leaders have had with President Trump when it comes to ending the war in Ukraine. He did say that England would be willing to send peacekeeping troops to Ukraine after a deal was struck between Russia and the Ukrainians in order to prevent any backsliding. That's something that President Trump has said he will not do. But what was very interesting to watch here today, Major, was some backtracking that President Trump has appeared to do when it comes to Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, who he called just last week a dictator. Today, when he was asked about that term, he said, I don't remember saying that about Zelensky. Next question. And in fact, in his press conference with Starmer, he actually said that he respects Zelensky, that he thinks they're going to get along great, and that he has great admiration for the Ukrainian people who have fought very bravely against the Russians. So a distinct change of tone from President Trump. It's not exactly clear why. As far as my exchanges with the president, the first one today had to do with veterans. Some 6,000 veterans, according to Democrats, have already been laid off or fired from their jobs in the federal government because veterans make up a significant portion of the federal workforce, about 30%. So I asked President Trump about that. Take a listen. Veterans make up 30% of the federal workforce. Are you tracking how many veterans have been fired so far, and do you want DOJ to avoid letting them go?
We take good care of our veterans, so we're watching that very carefully, and we hope it's going to be as small a number as possible. But we are having great success in slimming down our government. It's been really very successful, and some took payouts and buyouts, and others took other things, and some people we're finding out don't even exist. We're finding that we have a lot of people that don't exist, that people thought that did.
So President Trump saying there that they are looking out for their veterans. But again, according to estimates from Democrats, some 6,000 veterans have been fired so far, Major.
And on fentanyl, what did you talk to the president about, Nancy?
So President Trump announced today that he's going to be going forward with these 25% tariffs on Canada and Mexico. As you pointed out, Major, a month ago, he said he was going to give the two countries time to deal with the fentanyl problem. And if they did so, then perhaps they wouldn't be hit with these tariffs. But today, it appears he doesn't think they have done enough. And that is pretty strange in the case of Canada, because so little fentanyl, according to all the data we have, actually comes into the U.S. from Canada. So it's hard to see how they could bring it down even more. Take a listen to our exchange about that. Less than 1% of all fentanyl that comes into the U.S. is apprehended at the Canadian border. So why use fentanyl as a reason to impose tariffs on Canada?
They're only apprehending 1%. You're right about that. It's a little more than that. But they should be apprehending much more, because a lot comes through Canada.
His claims that there's more fentanyl coming in than we know about, they just aren't backed up by any data that we've seen, Major. As far as we know right now, 21,000 pounds of fentanyl were apprehended at the southern border last year, compared to 43 pounds at the northern border.
Nancy Cordes with the questions and the facts. Thank you very much. The Supreme Court has waded in to President Trump's push to cut foreign aid. Chief Justice John Roberts put a lower court order on hold that required the Trump administration to release about $2 billion in frozen assistance. The State Department and USAID contractors suing have until tomorrow to respond. Caitlin Huey-Burns joins us now from Capitol Hill. Caitlin, as I understand it, you talked to at least one employee of USAID that has lost their job. What was that interaction like?
Yeah, Major, we spent the morning at USAID headquarters here in Washington as now former workers were allowed into the building in 15-minute increments to collect their belongings. And we saw people bringing out suitcases, bringing out reusable grocery bags full of their belongings from their workspaces. As you can imagine, there were many people in tears, embracing, hugging. There was a group of people outside to support them. Every time someone left the building, that group cheered for them. And it was really, it felt like bearing witness to a situation of mass layoffs, which this was. But what we heard over and over again from the workers that I talked to was that they were less concerned about these cuts to the federal workforce and more concerned about the work that they were doing and the way in which they had been treated, kind of denigrated. U.S. government service being denigrated. Take a listen to what at least one of them told me earlier today.
We're not just faceless bureaucrats, we're actually people who have family, who have plans, who had aspirations, and now I just watched my career plan kind of go up in flames.
That was a sentiment heard kind of across the board. I talked to one woman who had a 6-month-old baby who came out carrying her breast pump and was kind of wondering what to do next. And again, they just reiterated that a lot of the work that they were doing was a key part of a long-standing mission for USAID.
And Caitlin, as I understand it, you talked to former USAID Administrator Samantha Power about all this.
That's right, and she served under the Biden administration. You may also remember she was President Barack Obama's UN ambassador as well. But she was making a twofold point to me. One, of course, the void that this leaves for actual people across the world, but also the way in which USAID has been kind of the vehicle for soft power in the United States, and the concern that that void would then be filled by China. And others, to say the least. Take a listen to what she had to say here.
What do you make of the argument that it's not being dismantled, it's just being moved over to the State Department?
It's not happening. I mean, you're laying off all the people who know how to prevent polio. That's not something you can't just like pull some rando off the street and say, hey, you know, go prevent polio.
So not so much opposition to this agency being moved into or folded into another one. I mean, Madeleine Albright had suggested that years ago as well, but it's the way in which they are going about it and essentially gutting the entire agency. And we learned today from the State Department, as you mentioned, nearly 10,000 contracts between state and USAID, the bulk of them coming from USAID, about 92% of the work eliminated.
Caitlin Huey-Burns on Capitol Hill, thank you very much. A meeting of experts at the Food and Drug Administration to discuss next season's flu vaccines has been canceled. Members of the FDA Advisory Committee were not given an explanation. The panel normally has a hand in recommending which strains of influenza should be covered in the yearly vaccines. The Department of Health and Human Services, which oversees the FDA, says the shots will be ready despite this canceled meeting. Alexander Tin joins me now here at the table. Alexander, walk our audience through this meeting, the schedule, and how it plays into preparations for next year's flu season.
Yeah, well, in a normal, in every previous flu season we've seen in recent history, the usual process is that sometime in late February, there's a meeting of the WHO. They call on the World Health Organization, and they call on experts from around the world, including the United States, including the CDC and FDA, to give their input on what the vaccines across the Northern Hemisphere for the next season should look like. That meeting is happening right now. And actually, the CDC and FDA were granted a waiver to participate in that meeting. You'll recall President Trump had ordered this withdrawal of U.S. from WHO. That meeting is happening. The recommendation is coming. What usually happens next is that the FDA asks its outside vaccine advisors, do you agree with this recommendation? 9 times out of 10, they say, yes, we agree with this recommendation. Then flu vaccine manufacturers take that recommendation and start the 6-month-long process of making flu shots. Now, the meeting has been canceled, but from what we've heard from HHS, they are still planning on making that recommendation. It's certainly possible for the FDA to do that internally without going through its outside vaccine advisors. They have the authority to do that. What has outside experts and health officials worried is the precedent it sets for the more controversial kinds of decisions that advisory committees like this are supposed to be weighing in on.
Does this create any possible blindness for this advisory committee about preparations for next year's flu season?
Yeah, well, I mean, to put it bluntly, this is the main way that health experts, that health officials usually come together and discuss these WHO recommendations, as well as data from the influenza season we've seen so far. I mean, this was a record season. We had questions about whether this season's flu vaccine was as effective as in previous vaccines. Usually all of those discussions happen at the FDA meeting, as well as at a parallel CDC meeting that usually happens this month. Both of those meetings, the FDA vaccine meeting as well as the CDC vaccine meeting, have been canceled.
Alexander Tin, thank you very much. I appreciate that. Poland's prime minister hits back at the president's claim that the European Union was formed to, quote, screw the United States. Next, we'll speak to a former ambassador to Poland about that and the Ukraine talks. You're watching America Decides. Welcome back. President Trump and UK Prime Minister Starmer discussed their efforts to bring the war in Ukraine to an end today at the White House.
We're working very hard to get that war brought to an end. I think we've made a lot of progress, and I think it's moving along pretty rapidly.
We've discussed a plan today to reach a peace that is tough and fair. The UK is ready to put boots on the ground and planes in the air to support a deal, working together with our allies, because that is the only way that peace will last.
Daniel Freed joins me now here at the table to discuss this and a lot more. He's formerly served as the U.S. ambassador to Poland. Dan, it's great to see you. Thanks for joining us. The British Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, also said that whatever the contours of the peace arrangement are, they cannot reward the aggressor. They cannot reward the invader. Words that President Trump so far has not used to describe this conflict or Vladimir Putin. Do you detect in that any distance, any significant strategic difference between the UK and the United States?
Within the 4 corners of Trump's plan to end the war, you could come out with a good deal. Now, the U.S. has stumbled over its own message this week. That weak UN General Assembly resolution and the inability of President Trump's people even before Congress, to say who the invader is. Hint, it's Russia. Everybody knows it. But you could still see a decent outcome, ceasefire in place and Ukrainian security. President Trump has gotten the British and French to agree in principle to put up forces. That's a very big deal without deployed U.S. forces. Trump ought to take the win.
Yeah.
The British and French would be fools, frankly, to go into Ukraine without some American backup. The Americans have said no troops on the ground. Okay, that means backup in the air, logistics, intelligence. That sounds like a package that could work. Now, Putin won't accept it. That's a whole other deal. But first, we have to come up with a strong package to make a peace sustainable.
And in the conversations in public today and earlier this week, in the contours of this yet to be signed, but we're expected to be signed tomorrow, U.S. and Ukrainian agreement about U.S. access to rare earth minerals in Ukraine, President said that's a security guarantee for Ukraine by itself, because we'll be there, we'll be on the ground, digging, mining, and no one's going to attack Ukraine if we're there. Is that credible, plausible?
It's a contribution to Ukrainian security, and if you read the deal, it's kind of a sketch rather than a full deal, but it's a plus. I think the Ukrainians are right to sign it, but it doesn't substitute for real security. The president's exaggerating the impact. Do you think Putin is going to worry about going after Ukraine if there are some U.S. engineers and business people on the ground? Yeah.
You mean, and by yeah, you mean no.
That's exactly right. We need more serious security backing for Ukraine. There's a plan on the table which would be a real win for Trump. He's called for the Europeans to step up to do more to defend themselves. Now the Europeans are planning to do it. That's why Trump should take the win.
Speaking of that language, stepping up, Keir Starmer, the UK Prime Minister, gave voice to some of that at the White House today. Let's listen.
Mr. President, in this new era, you're also right that Europe must step up. This year, we'll be giving more military aid to Ukraine than ever. And just this week, I've set out how we're shouldering more of the security burden. We're already one of the biggest spenders in NATO, and now we're going much further.
This is a reflection of the Trump effect. It's sometimes hostile, it's sometimes very sharp-elbowed, it's not diplomatic in a traditional sense, but in this context, Dan, it appears to have gotten some results.
Trump is getting traction for his ideas. He's getting the Europeans to do something that 3-4 months ago seemed far-fetched.
And the Biden administration was not vocally demanding.
Well, Trump could succeed, and more power to him if he does, but he needs to close the deal, and that means backing up the Europeans. It means staring down Vladimir Putin, because once we have a plan, Putin's going to say no. You realize that. I think everybody does.
And more to that point, Dan, when the president was asked today, do you expect Vladimir Putin, if there is an agreement reached, to live up to his obligations? He said, sure, I think he will. Does that sound to you in any way harmfully naive?
Well, it could be harmfully naive, although one of the better people in Trump world immediately remarked that it's Trump's way of warning Putin not to mess around. Now, could be either one, but it's important that the administration stop giving Putin gifts like refusing to say that it was a Russian invasion and supporting weak UN resolutions that have us side with the world's dictators and our foes rather than our friends. But still, for all the criticisms, and it's been a pretty rough week, you could still end up with a decent enough American-European plan to back Ukrainian security. Trump likes to win. This could be a win, but we face some tests ahead.
Dan Fried, it's been a pleasure, sir. Thanks so much for coming in.
Thanks for having me.
Jobless claims have risen. There's a worrisome sign in the U.S. labor market as voters look for action on the economy and inflation and other aspects. Next, CBS News polling expert, and that's what he is, Anthony Salvanto, joins us with a look at what people are saying about this issue. You're watching America Decides. Welcome back to America Decides. Let's talk money. Your money, my money, everybody's money. So the stock market has either been volatile or sliding downwards lately. Consumer confidence index is also down. Unemployment claims slightly up. CBS News Executive Director of Elections and Surveys, Anthony Salvanto. He's your friend. He's my friend. Joins us now. Anthony, it's early days, but how do the data that you're looking at suggest people are absorbing early days of the Trump administration / Trump economy?
You know what, Major? I am here with a sort of update to a continuing story, which is inflation, people say, is still affecting them. Look at this. Almost 2/3 of people say they look around them and that prices around them are still going up or staying the same. Another third say that. And you mentioned all those macro numbers, right? But we know that prices are the way that people process things because it's right up close to them, right? Now, here's another part of this. Is your income keeping up with inflation? Look at that big number, 3/4 that say no, it isn't. And that's a big reason why people say overall still that the national economy is bad. I do want to point out this too, and it's important. If you look at what people are concerned about, the big top answer is saving and buying extra. Yes, there's a slight majority who are worried about housing, which a lot of people call unaffordable, about paying their debts. But this one strikes me because it's not just about meeting your day-to-day bills, which of course is important, but also people are telling us they want to be able to save. They want to be able to get ahead. And it's prices that's the number one reason they say that so many can't do it, Major.
And Anthony, is this in the data a Biden hangover, or is it becoming a Trump problem?
Well, look, if you just look at the pattern, the percent saying the U.S. economy is bad, this is a story, like I mentioned, that has been ongoing since the pandemic, really. You go back to March 2020, and you see substantial numbers of people, majorities about the same level, saying the U.S. economy is bad. So in that sense, it is continuing. But then you start looking ahead, because look, that's what confidence is all about, right? Will people spend money? Do they think things are going to get better, get worse? You see more people right now saying they think things will get worse than get better. That's particularly the case among people who say they're having more trouble making ends meet. And you see a third, not most, but a third, who think that things over the next year are going to start booming or growing. So that's the confidence measure that we need to keep tracking from here, Major.
Fascinating data always. Anthony Salvanto, my friend, thank you.
Thank you.
Relationships take work. That's kind of a truism. British Prime Minister Keir Starmer and President Trump met to discuss their differences, their compatibilities on Ukraine, tariffs, and more. Our reporter panel will weigh in on that next. You're watching America Decides.
Thank you for changing the conversation to bring about the possibility that now we can have a peace deal, and we want to work with you to make sure that peace deal is enduring, that it lasts, that it's a deal that goes down as a historic deal, that nobody breaches.
Welcome back. Thanks for staying with us. That was British Prime Minister Keir Starmer inside the Oval Office, as you could notice, this afternoon with President Trump. Dasha Burns, Finn Gomez join me now. Dasha is the newly minted Politico White House bureau chief. Talk about newly minted. Finn is our executive director of White House and politics coverage. It's great to have you both with us. I want to play you something that also happened in that Oval Office meeting between the British Prime Minister and the American President, when a reporter asked President Trump if he still considers Ukrainian President Zelensky a dictator. Control room, please roll that.
The next step we're making is toward a very achievable ceasefire. We hope that that can happen quickly, because thousands of young people, in this case, we're not talking about Americans, we're talking about Ukrainians and Russians, are being killed every week.
I said please. That's not the one. Let's try the one. If we have it, can we have it? Can we try that again? I'll say please 3 times. Please, please, please. Not there? All right. We will get there. Well, yes?
I think I have a very good relationship with President Zelensky.
Do you think that Mr. Zelensky is a dictator?
Did I say that? I can't believe I said that. Next question.
Yeah, next question. Did I say that? Okay. So that's worth waiting for, folks, because it is emblematic of a Trumpian technique. Say something harsh, pretend you never said it, because you're in the process of trying to soften somebody up or get something else that no one else can quite see. It might have all been about negotiations over this mineral access deal. We don't know. But it's all been withdrawn, everything's fine, and we move on. That's kind of a pattern. Dasha, your thoughts?
Well, Finn and I were here ready to basically do an SNL-style replay of that for you.
I have a British accent ready, just in case.
Look, when I talk to White House officials, they oftentimes say, art of the deal, art of the deal. You hear that a lot in the press area from staff because they'll point to things like calling Zelensky a dictator. They'll point to Trump talking about the Riviera of the Middle East, not to take that stuff literally, but to watch how he uses that to bring people to the table. And look, whether you think that's a good tactic or not, what his staff maintains and what we've seen time and time again from Trump is sowing the kind of pearl clutching or the concerns or the uncertainty or the chaos is part of his strategy.
And when the British Prime Minister says, thank you, Mr. President, for changing the conversation about Ukraine and Russia, that's a Trump win.
Absolutely. And I was speaking with a senior official with a NATO country earlier in the week who speaking about that dictatorship line from the president. It did rattle a lot of Western leaders. It absolutely
for obvious reasons.
It did. But also, what I would note from today, what I saw, and I know Dasha was in the room, but what I saw was like the strategy I thought the prime minister had today was similar to Macron, which was not about this. It wasn't about this certain aggressive tone or tenor. It was more about it was flattering.
Yes.
It was a sense of, it was
a lot of common ground stuff.
Yes, and a sense of like, and that
so far, it went so far as when a reporter wisely asked the British Prime Minister, hey, what about Canada? And does the king have any concerns about losing a part of his realm? Starmer like buried it. Like, you're trying to drive a wedge between us. Next question, or forget it.
But what you hear both with Starmer and with Macron is they're trying to give Trump a win, telling him, hey, you're doing something historic. And what would be super historic, Mr. President, if there was a security guarantee
right.
to
if this
make
thing
sure.
sticks and is real.
Right, exactly. So they're
Don't make
in their
faux
own
history,
way,
make real history.
They know that pushing him on that isn't going to work. But if they flatter him and they make sure that he sees it as something that's good for him, then that might actually pull through.
So I want to play something we've pulled together, which is a compendium, a mashup, if you will, of what the president and what Elon Musk have said about the federal workforce. Let's listen.
We're cutting down government. We're cutting down the size of government. We have to. We're bloated. We're sloppy. We have a lot of people that aren't doing their job. We have a lot of people that don't exist.
They get wealthy. We don't know why. Where does it come from? And I think the reality is that they're getting wealthy at the taxpayer expense.
We're removing all of the unnecessary, incompetent, and corrupt bureaucrats from the federal workforce. That's what we're doing.
So either they don't exist or they do exist, but they're getting wealthy, or they're sloppy and bloated, which means they're not smart enough to get wealthy. I'm not quite sure what it all is about. Dasha?
Look, the messaging on DOGE has been all over the place. What I keep hearing is President Trump is still very much on board with what Musk is doing. He's telling him to be more aggressive. Now, the people around Trump that are concerned about what this might mean for him down the line, look, USAID, a lot of the base was frustrated with an agency like that. That was low-hanging fruit. That was easy. Now you're starting to maybe hit the bone a little bit with where he's going, and that is where his staff is concerned, especially when he sends out an email, the 5 things email, right? Did not run by the senior staff at the White House. They could have told him that, hey, this might not be the best approach. Point being, the theory of DOGE, a lot of people are behind. The execution is where a lot of folks in the White House, the people closest to Trump, are concerned.
And Finn, it struck me, as I'm sure it struck you and Dasha yesterday, Musk standing at the cabinet meeting, looking down on all of the cabinet secretaries.
Speaking first.
Yeah, pardon me?
Speaking first, also.
Yes. That is the pinnacle. Okay, there's going to be another cabinet meeting in this presidency. If Musk isn't there, then you're no longer as important. I mean, unless you're going to come to every cabinet meeting and stand up and lecture everyone like you did the first time. He might. But if he doesn't, the first time that happens, he's diminished. And this relationship with the cabinet and Trump is going to be under constant scrutiny.
No, absolutely. And I think, I think reading the tea leaves there, reading that imagery that we saw yesterday, Like you said, it is a pinnacle. Let's see how that goes. We remember, I mean, it's the closest thing I would compare it to his relationship with Steve Bannon or early Trump and Trump 1.0, and that changed dramatically. Look, it could be different. It could be a different dynamic. But as we all know, covering Trump for years now, things change, and they can change rather quickly.
And Dasha, very quickly, Politico has a piece about Democratic state attorneys general thinking they have found the proper legal flex against the Trump administration. What's that all about?
Well, and one big piece of that strategy is they started preparing what they were expecting to need to battle early on. This was a plan that they coordinated before January 20th. Not a whole lot of the Democratic Party has been thinking that way. So they're trying to be sort of a model to show, look, you can band together. You need to be on the same page to resist some of this stuff. I don't see that happening really anywhere else with Democrats right now, except for these attorneys general, and they've had some success.
Because the only way to really battle with executive orders are with litigious action. It's very smart by the Democratic AGs.
Dasha Burns, Finn Gomez, and your assembled titles. Thank you.
Thank you.
USAID workers clear out their desks and do so pretty quickly under orders. It's President Trump's push to very much reduce the size and scope of that agency enters its final stage. Next, we'll speak with a Democratic congressman about his efforts to, at least at the margins, or maybe even more beyond the margins, rein in the projected or sought cuts from the Department of Government Efficiency. That's next. You're watching America Decides. Well, welcome back. Thanks for staying with us. Today we saw the human toll of the Trump administration's federal job cuts. This was the scene downtown Washington as emotional USAID employees were given, yes, 15 minutes only to retrieve their belongings and remove themselves from their headquarters after losing their jobs. These kinds of layoffs are taking place across the country and in other parts of the world. I want to bring in Democratic Congressman Suhas Subramaniam, who represents Virginia's 10th congressional district. He has introduced legislation calling for, among other things, more transparency from the Department of Government Efficiency. And I want everyone to understand the congressman is en route to a town hall in his district on this topic, possibly others, and is pulled over to the side of the road so he can speak to us. So, Congressman, thanks for pulling over safely to the side of the road. What are you hearing so far from your constituents about this federal workforce reduction?
Yeah, my district is about 40 minutes from Washington, D.C., where a lot of the agencies are headquarters, and we have headquarters of agencies in our district as well. And I've heard a lot of confusion, frustration, chaos, and most importantly, just a lot of anger over how this is going down. It's one thing to make government better and more efficient. It's another thing to fire the very people who make government more efficient and serve the American people. And this won't just hurt the federal workers or the contractors. This will hurt all Americans and will have, irreversible damage to our country.
What do you want from DOGE, the Department of Government Efficiency, that you're so far not getting?
Anything. Answers, accountability, transparency, and really some sort of indication of what they're doing and why they're doing it. Now, I think I understand it now that we've had about a month or two to see it in action. I think this is more about revenge over political opponents and ideology and control over the federal institutions. I think that's what this seems to be really about, because if this was about cutting costs and making sure we're more efficient, you wouldn't be firing people, let's say the USDA, that do make sure our crops are healthy, right? Because even if you save $100,000 on a salary now, you're going to have millions of dollars in damage later on. And there's just so many stories that I hear all over my district of federal workers who, it's one thing, they are definitely concerned about their jobs, what's going to happen with their families, and how they're going to put food on the table. But they're also concerned about the work they were doing and how important it was. And it's going to do damage to everyone, not just federal workers.
And there have been, as you know, Congressman, some reassessments of these layoffs. Veterans have been called back after being fired. Certain essential workers that the administration discovered they didn't want to fire have been called back to work. Does that contribute from your interactions within your district to this level of confusion and dismay?
Yes, but at the same time, I also see those as victories, as the administration backtracking. Many of the stories that people shared with my office, we ended up bringing attention to them and putting pressure on the administration. And, they fell back. I think if the more people speak up, the more they're going to see some changes because people have a lot of power in this instance. So I've encouraged people. We're having a town hall in about an hour, and that's where I'm going to right now. And, we had about 600 seats in the auditorium. 800 signed up, but we had to stop letting people sign up. There's thousands more that I think could end up joining us online. And people are telling their stories, and we're seeing change because they are speaking up. They're not letting this happen without a fight. And the more people fight, the more I think they'll see results.
Virginia's Republican Governor Glenn Youngkin has set up a website that advocates, it says, on behalf of federal workers who have been or will be laid off. It's sort of a resource available for these workers that the governor and his staff have put forward. What's your reaction to that?
Yes, we put a similar resource out. I think it's really rich that the governor, who's told these federal workers who are getting fired, instead of being their champion to go find another job in the private sector, I think the reality is he's running for president in 2028. And so, he's trying to suck up to the current president, and he doesn't have the best interests of Virginians in heart because if he ran statewide in Virginia again, he would lose because of his actions right now. He's not doing things that are popular, and he's not doing things that are best for Virginians. And so that's my reaction to that.
In the cloakroom, when you talk to House Republicans, if you have the chance to do so, what are you hearing about the concerns that you're experiencing in your district? Is there any crossover among Republicans?
Republicans have been very silent. They've been very nervous. I think on the Democratic side, we've heard from constituents asking us to do more. I think my constituents appreciate all that I'm doing, but they want to know why Republicans are just letting this happen. And so I've always told people, yes, call my office. Yes, send us emails, but call the Republicans too. Come out to their town halls as well. Show up and fight in front of them too, because that could also make a change. In the end, they have a very thin margin in Congress. They have a thin margin in the U.S. Senate. And so, we have to keep putting the pressure on them.
Congressman Suhas Subramaniam, thank you very much for your time, sir. Change has come to the White House press pool, why the president is exerting very new control over it, and why you should care. That's next. You're watching America Decides. Welcome back. Let's talk about something I know firsthand, covering a president as part of the White House press pool. The pool, if you don't know this, dates back to the presidency of Franklin Delano Roosevelt. It solves a very simple physics problem that, if not solved, creates a very real information problem. The physics problem is this: how can reporters cover the president in small spaces and on a round-the-clock basis? You can't have 50 or 100 accredited White House reporters do this, hence the pool, composed of a small number of wire service, radio, magazine, newspaper, and later TV correspondents. I have done this work many times. As a TV pool correspondent, I was the eyes and ears of every broadcast and cable outlet that covered the White House. I did this work at the White House, across our country, in Moscow, Hanoi, Baghdad, Beijing, many other places. The pool assignments are done on a rotating basis, which until this week was handled by the White House Correspondents Association. Now, the Trump White House will assign 1 or 2 slots in the pool.
For decades, a group of D.C.-based journalists, the White House Correspondents Association, has long dictated which journalists get to ask questions of the President of the United States in these most intimate spaces. Not anymore.
So far, these slots have gone to so-called new media representatives with obvious or implied pro-Trump orientations. And the questions put to the president by these representatives have so far lived up to these orientations. The White House Correspondents Association criticized this move, saying it, quote, tears at the independence of a free press in the United States, unquote. So what does all this mean? For perspective, Marie Aberger joins us now. She was a communications aide for the Obama administration and served at what we know in the White House press as a press wrangler, meaning she dealt on an hour-to-hour, day-to-day basis with the White House press pool. Marie, it's good to see you. Thanks for joining us. What was your experience as a press wrangler, and what do you conclude, if anything, about this Trump White House move?
It's great to see you, especially like you mentioned, as you're a former member of our press pool. So I was a press wrangler, which is a strange title, but the best job at the White House. And my job was to work closely with the White House Correspondents Association to implement their rotation of press who were going to be in our pool. So like you mentioned, there is a space issue. If I had to bring press with me in every motorcade, Air Force One, everywhere from ice cream with the girls to a G8 summit, there was only a limited number of people who could come. I worked closely with the White House Correspondents Association, got a list of reporters, worked with those reporters to get them everything they need, and we went everywhere with the president, and they took that information and got it out to the world. At the time I was the wrangler, press pool reports went to over 7,000 people. So this is the way the press can make sure everyone can cover, have eyes and ears on the president, even if they're not there live with us in person.
And there is a considerable cost involved for the news organizations that participate on a regular basis in the pool.
Huge cost. It's a big investment. Think about this. You're being part of a motorcade. You're taking Air Force One to foreign countries. There's a big cost. And so these news organizations were making it possible for everyone who wanted to cover the president to still be able to do it, even if they couldn't pay the sometimes tens of thousands of dollars it costs to cover the president abroad.
Was it ever tempting within the Obama White House to wish you could exert more control over who was in the pool?
Of course. I mean, as a person who was managing the press for the president, sometimes we'd be in the room and press would keep yelling questions and I would say, thank you, press, please leave the room. And of course, would I have loved it to go easier sometimes? Yes. But you know what? I keep thinking about this time abroad where we were with President Obama and a foreign president, and I could not get the press to leave the room. And this foreign president looked at me and he goes, why are you letting them do that? I wouldn't let them do that. And I think that kind of changed my whole perspective of, being annoyed with that we weren't leaving the room and instead being like, this is us being leaders abroad. This is us showing, we believe in freedom of press. So of course, were some people nicer to me than others? Yes. Were some days harder than others? Yes. But at the end of the day, I wasn't picking and choosing people personally to settle a score. Our press office couldn't say, hey, we really didn't like that story you did yesterday. You're off the plane tomorrow. And it just matters so much.
And do you think it will become, over time, a burden for the Trump White House to handle this day-to-day task of deciding who's in and who's out of the pool?
I honestly don't think it's a burden. I think they're going to just go and make this a state-run press. They're going to dismantle the free press. And I think it's a lot easier for a president to only have to answer the questions you want to answer when you want to answer from people you've hand-selected to be friendly and tell the stories you want them to tell. It's a lot harder to be accountable to a free press. I mean, there's a reason one of the first things tyrants and dictators do is establish a state-run press. I think it's a lot easier to just, not have anyone hold you accountable. I think it's on all of the people who've worked with the press and all of the press to make it a burden by lifting this up, talking about why it's a problem constantly so it becomes a burden, because otherwise there's no reason for Trump to want to take hard questions.
And very quickly, Marie, when the White House says we're just adding one or two of the new media, everyone else in the pool stays, so it's not that big a change, you would say what?
I would say when the press office is dictating the press who get to cover the president, we are no longer believing in a free press. I think this is the beginning of a pattern. It started with suing TV networks. Then it was the AP. Now it's the press pool. I think we are working on a journey towards there not being any press in the room who are going to ask hard questions. And I don't think this can be about any specific outlet, any specific reporter, any specific wrangler. This is about the American people and whether reporters are able to get the American people information about what the president is doing so we can hold them accountable to help us and not hurt us.
Marie Aberger, I remember time with you in the Obama White House well. Thanks so much for your time.
Thank you.
That does it for today. We'll be back with another edition of America Decides tomorrow at 5 p.m. Eastern. The Daily Report starts right now.